We were always aware there was a possibility of there being a movie of V. That was part of the deal of selling rights to DC. It was an idea that could be transposed. We didn't have a sort of pure concept of it. Oh no, this is just a comic, blah blah blah. My only expectation and desire of any adaptation that I've been involved in is that it's good.
The Wachowski brothers wrote the first draft in the mid-90s, before we made The Matrix. It followed very closely the novel, and it was very dense, and it didn't have what the current movie has.
Start, you'd be framed here, camera left would be framed here, like down through him. I was the assistant director on the Matrix films, and to live in the Matrix world is to know the graphic novel world. Larry and Andy are big fans of graphic novels, so I remember on my birthday, actually, Larry and Andy gave me a present and they said, hey, have you read this, V for Vendetta? And they said, well, what do you think about us producing it and you directing it? And I said, well, that sounds like it could be good.
There is a stream of graphic novels, a thread of them which are adult and sophisticated and regarded by aficionados as full literature. And since meeting James, I have read the original V for Vendetta, and I have to say I admire it enormously. It's a remarkable piece of work.
Whereas a graphic novel was written as like a thinly veiled kind of allegory about the Thatcherite period, and it was written in the 80s. And, the backstory was set in the 80s, and then the current story of the novel was set in the 90s. We thought it might be good to make the backstory in the 90s and project it into the future a bit. In an adaptation, I guess, there's always things that you're going to have to leave out and, put in, take out. So we tried to, condense it and make the graphic novel more filmic.
The graphic novel is immense, and it would require many hours of movie to kind of explain it all. The Wachowski brothers viewed this story from a little different angle. They focused more on the V-Evie relationship.
They challenged concepts that you might be comfortable with already, that you might have set ideas about certain issues in your mind already, and this sort of, attacks those, and I was just really excited by it.
There was a couple of, things that we wanted to address. One, which was the Evie character, who, in the graphic novel, is sort of this blonde-haired young girl, bit of a cipher, I guess, We thought it would be better to make her a little more intelligent, a little more, have a little more smarts, not just be such a pawn of V.
Usually with action films based on graphic novels, you don't really get the sense of thought behind it that you find in this script. And so I read it and I was just so excited by it.
It is a graphic novel. It's done slightly differently to how you have to make a film. There has to be a certain sort of other level on a film, a certain level of kind of reality.
Of course it's tricky. It's not entirely realistic. It's not meant to be. So that's what I find interesting about it, because when I've seen so much of realism, it's good to be working on something that has a certain heightened quality to it.
Fucking hell.
The graphic novel itself was drawn in a very cinematic way, and when it was done, it broke with convention, broke with, thought balloons and, word balloons. You could see when David Lloyd was actually drawing it, some of the frames are very cinematic.
I'm happy to see see the silver screen now in a very good version.
Who was he?
He was Edmund Dantes, and he was my father, and my mother, my brother, my friend.
I think it's a political thriller, first and foremost. It is in the superhero genre, but it's also a play on that convention.
It is an action film, and it does have a lot of action elements, but it isn't a pure action film. There's a lot of ideas that take it above that. I mean, it's a strange world.
Who is but the form following the function of what? And what I am is a man in a mask.
The world in V for Vendetta is that it has become a one-party state, a fascist state.
It's a police state, basically, where a very malign government is attempting to create a world where ethnic minorities are disenfranchised and not just marginalized, but used as experimental material.
There isn't much of the world left, you know. And what is left, England seems to be sort of on top. There isn't. The United States is virtually wiped out, it seems.
Society is now ruled by government, rather than the government sort of being run as a voice of the people. It's sort of, in some ways, you know, flipped around.
There's a kind of tradition of these films which I love. It's one of the reasons I took this job on, was because I always adored films like Logan's Run and Zardoz and Fahrenheit 451 and The Omega Man and Soylent Green. You know, dystopic movies, they used to be called. Movies set in a bleak future in which, you know, the heroes choose freedom over the oppression of the current time. And that kind of film's rather disappeared from mainstream cinema for years and years and years, and it's rather good to have it back.
There are, of course, those who do not want us to speak.
I suspect right now orders are being shouted at the phones and men with guns will soon be on their way.
It's more like 1984 meets Alien, if you want to do one of those modern meetings, than it is Orwellian in that sense. You know, it's borrowed a bit from Orwell.
I think the satire, which is clearly abundant in the film. I mean, it is a film which pulls no punches in its satire against authoritarianism, against oppression, against the general move that you might say this 21st century is taking in some so-called civilized countries against gay rights, against religious freedom, against the other, against outsiders.
The only thing that you and I have in common, Mr. Creedy, is that we're both about to die.
It's very sort of complex, the story of V for Vendetta, because on one hand you have like the lead character who is very altruistic and thinks he can bring about great change, you know, within the government by making the people come together and making them realise how the government has, you know, somehow got it out of control because they're giving them their sort of bread and circuses every day. But then, you know, he has this great moral ambiguity, which is, on the other hand, he has this murderous vendetta about everyone who's ever done anything wrong to him.
He is the hero, but he's not always good, and he sometimes does things that you can't possibly like because he's vengeful. Because of that, it sort of taints his political idealism.
Beneath this mask, there is more than flesh. Beneath this mask, there is an idea, Mr. Creedy.
It's a rough movie. It deals with a character who is a terrorist, and he is an uncompromising character. I mean, he wants to fulfill his agenda, which is to get back at the people that have harmed him and, in his feeling, harm society.
He's a pretty complex man. One side of him is he's been imprisoned and tortured and abused, mentally and physically abused, and then burnt in fire. So that has created a vengeful angel, if you like.
One thing I didn't want to do is, and it harks back to, I guess, other superhero movies, is you always, at some point, the mask always comes off, which is good, but it's also like a bit of a cinematic cheat sometimes. I thought it might be good to, for once, play against audience expectation.
Right at the end of the film, there's a scene where Evie, Natalie's character, kisses V, and I'm interested as to how that scene will work coming after a whole film and seeing this man in the mask, and it very rarely has been touched, and then the first thing that touches it are the lips of Natalie Portman.
She has to have an arc. I mean, she goes from being this kind of normal, everyday, you know, kind of PA at a television studio to a revolutionary.
You see that she's really passive in the beginning, and she's just trying to live her life and be under the radar and be, you know, stay safe. And you can see where she comes from because of what happened with her parents. She's very afraid. I think she lives through her fear, which I think is common in this society, and also, you know, sort of reflects a lot of the sort of politicking that's happening in our world today, sort of fear-based politicking, that you should be afraid of everything.
Muslims, homosexuals, terrorists, disease-ridden degenerates. They had to go. Strength through unity.
The most interesting thing about making this movie has been the chance to say something about the political climate that we live in. It dared to ask the questions, you know, and it's not saying this is right and this is wrong, because, you know, the morality of it's very, you know, ambiguous at times, but it asks you questions that you can think about.
The themes are serious. I'm not quite sure that the treatment is as serious as that. But on the other hand, if it was as serious as that, I'm not sure that it would reach the amount of people that it's intended to reach.
I'd never seen a Hollywood script that really kind of addressed issues that are things we're all talking about at the moment. You know, whether or not the threat or perceived threat, whether it's of terrorism or of disease or of anything else, justifies a diminution in civil liberties.
The fear that everybody has about attacks, terrorist attacks in the world and a lot of the laws being brought in to counter that, sometimes quite oppressive laws. It doesn't take a great leap of imagination to see why and how a state might want a lot more control.
It's obviously not about America now or even Britain now, but it is nonetheless, it's about those very issues. And that's a marvellous thing to think that Hollywood is again able to do that.
We cannot shirk this responsibility. We will stand tall.
The political polemic in the script is what I've shot. It hasn't been watered down, and I think it's one of the great things that Warner Brothers have done, you know, that was like, you know, go off and make the film, go off and make it as it is, and there's been no editorialization.
I know this world is screwed up, believe me, I know it better than most. Which is why I wanted to ask if there's anything I can do to help make it right.
We had a lot of talks about what it is to be political, and also the political versus the personal, and what kind of choices you make in your life to be a political person, and how that affects your private life, and what it would be like for someone like Evie to have had her parents choose their political ideals over her, basically. And I think that, you know, for the character of Evie, that's an important place where she comes from, because you sort of wonder if we were in an oppressive government as resisting and being really active.
It is to Madame Justice that I dedicate this concerto.
I think the script does have something to say about terrorism, I suppose, and its position, which I wouldn't say that terrorism is malign, because I don't think any form of warfare is malign. I think it's all atrocious. But it's peculiar that one form of warfare should be regarded suddenly as being not on.
We talk about terrorists a lot today, and yet there's probably very little attempt to try to understand why people are terrorists.
This is a movie about a terrorist, and the hero is a terrorist. And it's a very good ethical point, because, as we all know, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
The idea of a terrorist who's a freedom fighter, by transplanting him into a post 9/11 world, and to bring him into a society where one can question the political philosophy of our time. It does work. I mean, it's an anti-fascist story, anti-Holocaust story.
Action! Hold your fire!
I guess the story is not unlike a resistance that would have happened with the French against the Nazis during the war, or the founding fathers of the American Revolution against the British. It's a very different story, it's a very different circumstances, but it's not unlike those as well, and it's a person kind of awakening people to to an idea, and then it's the people who take the idea on and make it a reality.
It's really a meditation on what happens when a government pushes people too far. It's a warning, it's a pretty ancient warning about the function of government and its responsibility towards its citizens.
Please. You don't have to go. You could let it go. We could leave here together.
I can't.
That's the great thing about the Wachowski brothers, is that when they write a project, they don't clarify what the audience is seeing with a specific point of view. They leave the audience to determine how they want to interpret the material. I think that it's a politically charged movie, but it's up to the audience to figure what that means and how that affects that each single person's thinking.